I tell you, I mean, I don't know about you, Benedict, but people have become so inspired by this useless government that they've actually started creating, you know, memes, creating songs, poems. I think it's showing Britain in a great light, this.
It is, although it does further show up the poor state of BBC comedy in this country.
Yes.
That actually all you have to do is just go, what's your creative best effort?
Yeah.
And it will be better than whatever comes up on, for instance, Have I Got News for You?
Have I Got News for You,
But it's, as you say, it's nice that everybody's battening down the hatches for the winter and going, well, you might as well laugh at it because it's not going to get any better.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I started doing this a few weeks ago where I thought, you know, you can't just wake up every day and be angry because they're so bad, they're so ridiculous that it's actually worth laughing about because it makes you feel better. And in the end, we are being united by this government against them, which has got to be a good thing. Now, let's talk about Joe Biden, because things could be worse. Over in the United States of America, the Wall Street Journal, which is a sister organisation to us, they've got an office here in News UK, have exposed what they call a years-long cover-up that also saw the administration in the United States gaslighting those who dared to claim that Joe Biden's abilities had somehow deteriorated since he was Barack Obama's vice president. They basically said they've tried to hide Joe Biden's rapidly diminishing mental condition from the public for his entire presidency. They're basically saying he was gaga from day one. Yeah, I'm not surprised by this because I remember watching him during the debates 4 years ago. Here he is falling asleep, by the way. And thinking he is not the man that he was even a couple of months before. It was very clear that he was... So I remember this at the time. People were saying during that election, he's not all there. And something is going on here. And it was the whole sort of, you know, wandering towards the wrong door or having to be sort of... And, you know, to be fair, confused. Yeah, he did decline massively after the election. It had been relatively slow, but the telltale signs were absolutely there. So I'm not surprised at all to discover that there was something of an active attempt to cover this up. I mean, for heaven's sake, they did it right up until this election, right up until it was impossible to hide on national television during a debate. And I mean, when Trump said himself, I don't know what he said, I don't think even he knows what he said, and Biden just looked around and go, and that was the moment where it was kind of like, well, I think the game really is up here now. So yeah, not surprised at all. I'm also not surprised, frankly, at the. But it's shocking, really. But it's shocking to think that because it's not so much the fact that Biden had to kind of become too sort of dementia riddled to do his job. It's the fact that they covered it up, and that's the thing that I think we should be very worried about. Let's have a look at what he said once when he was talking about Kamala Harris.
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president. That I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one, the fact is that the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again.
No, you won't, actually, Joe, as it turns out, because one, you didn't run, and two, you didn't beat him, so that's a no, I'm afraid. And also he referred to Vice President Trump, who he picked instead of Vice President Kamala Harris. Do you remember when he was stood next to Volodymyr Zelensky and he was saying he's pledging his support to President Putin? And Zelensky's just stood there going, I'm sorry, what? I know. I mean, there are gaffes and there are gaffes. And that's just the beginning. We're going to play loads of them. In fact, if you can remember any that you want us to replay. We've got the Putin one. Should we have a look? All right, let's go. And that's just a little compilation of some of the things that happened during his presidency. We should also remember, by the way, that Keir Starmer went over to see him. Do you remember? Shortly before he dropped out of the race. Only to return to tell us, actually, everyone said, how's Joe Biden? He went, absolutely brilliant. He's fine. He's got absolutely no cognitive issues, and he will be the next president of the United States of America. About 4 days later, Biden pulled out of the race.
I mean, the whole thing is just... the fact that Starmer was prepared to go along with it as well, rather than... Actually, I know it probably wouldn't have won him many friends, but the sensible thing would have actually been either to just not answer that question or actually give a slightly more accurate appraisal of the situation. I know it's not like the most highbrow comedy there, but the fact that when he was at that podium and he turned to nobody and stuck his hand out, you know, hoping to shake someone's hand, you're just thinking, oh, come on. Like, I mean, and Starmer should be able to see what we can all see.
Yes.
We're not in the United States. We're not plugged into that kind of Democratic Party.
This is what annoys me so much about this current Labour government, is that they're attempting to talk to us as if we're idiots. You know, they say things which we clearly can see are not true. It's like them saying, you know, look over here, look at this amazing car that I've just brought you, and it's a bike. And you're going, actually, it's not a car.
Well...
and they're going, no, it's definitely a car.
What was it last week? Was it Angela Rayner who was asked, I think it was by Trevor Phillips, about... social housing. We don't have enough social housing. All right, but what about all of these migrants? Oh, well, there's not a shortage of social housing. And you kind of sat there going, and Trevor Phillips...
And there's plenty of housing.
Yeah, you hear his voice going, hang on, what are you talking about? This is actually nuts. But she just doubled down.
Just kept saying it.
Yeah,
well, we had Jim McMahon, who I didn't even know existed before this week, who's apparently the devolution minister. We had him on during the week, who couldn't answer a question and just kept talking at me as if he thought, if I just keep talking and babbling, he won't be able to get a question in. It's like, what's the point of coming on TV? Why are you bothering to do it? Sean in Norfolk says this: Merry Christmas, Mike and Benedict. I can't wait for 2025 and more Keith, Stalin and gang making us poorer and more fed up. Looking forward to Plank of the Year. I think the winner is probably an odds-on favourite. I think you're probably right, Sean. You will find out who's won it. This is Gaff Friday, of course. It's a special Christmas Gaffs Friday. Here's one when I accidentally played a piece of music that I didn't know I was going to do.
We're worrying about energy bills, we're worrying about food, we're worrying about fuel. Water wasn't really on the radar.
Sorry, go on. Sorry, go on.
It's a really big change in thinking about this resource. So as part of the survey, we also found that
I couldn't stop it. I don't know why it started playing. And it wasn't even because I'd been playing it before. But it was the theme from Titanic, suddenly started playing on my phone.
It's the fact that there's a story about Thames Water that just adds to it perfectly.
Thames Water, there's a story. We've still got stories about that, them in the papers this morning. Apparently there's a whole load of fat cats who are getting loads and loads and loads of money on the basis that they've done such a bad job. They've had to cover it up by paying themselves massive bonuses. Yesterday we heard that we're going to be putting up prices once again by minimum 36% a year, possibly bigger than that in some cases. I mean, I fail to understand. Oh, here we go. Furious rip-off, 36% hike in water bills. And here's the fat cat bosses making millions as failing firms dump sewage. And they're picking on one particular guy, Chris Weston, who's the chief executive of Thames Water. He accepted £195,000 of a bonus for the first 3 months of the year.
Yeah. I mean,
incredible, isn't it?
It is. The sewage thing always slightly gets to me, though. This has become a particular bugbear because it's always picked up, it's often very picked up by Remainers as a sign of, you know, the dangers of deregulation now that we've left the European Union. Our rivers are not, in fact, any more dirty than they used to be. We've simply improved the mechanisms and the regularity by which we actually measure how much sewage there is. I don't know if this has come as a shock to people. Your sewage doesn't just stay in your lavatory. It has to go somewhere, and very often it goes into the river. We actually have some of the world's cleanest rivers. Again, real curveball to a lot of people who are insistent that Brexit is poisoning everything and that you can't swim in the sea, or that you can't swim in your room. And it's all the Tories' fault. Well, that's exactly the thing. Everything is the Tories' fault. This happened under their watch. There are so many issues with water in this country. The leaking pipes, the amount of water that we waste by the fact that we still have Victorian pipes, that water companies have not spent money updating because they're giving themselves dividends, or the fact that we don't dredge our rivers. Lots of things you can complain about. But the sewage thing, that's a proper kind of... I know.
I mean, I've actually watched, believe it or not, as the improvements have been made, because I walked the dog that I've got down in Bexhill Beach, and I was there. I think it was probably after the terrible disaster of last spring. I think it was when there was lots of heavy rain and lots of heavy water. And Bexhill was one of those horrible scenes where there was that sort of brown splurge going on into the sea. And they've actually put a new pipe in, and you know, I was down there watching them do it. And so now apparently that's been improved. So you know, there are some improvements being made. I'm not defending the water industry, because I think the water industry is a complete disaster in this country, but it has been for many a year, and it's not the Tories' fault, it's everybody's fault.
Oh, of course. We're talking, we are talking about infrastructure that's not been updated for, I mean, in some cases, centuries. That's part of the problem, is that it's still the same Victorian piping. And, you know, to be fair, a lot of it was quite good. That's why it lasted as long as it did. But, you know, we are in a very fortunate position because we get that much rain and we have that much natural water resources that we can get away with actually not being very good at maintaining these things. But as with many things in this country, after a while it begins to pile up, and now you get into the situation where people's bills are going to be going up, frankly, a pretty catastrophic amount in a very short space of time. Now, water companies would argue that it's not been keeping pace with inflation anyway, which is a fair point. But nonetheless, it's just another of those things that you kind of look there and, you know, some people will say it's the Tories, some people will say it's the fault of the companies, some people will say it's the fault of the actual regulation. It's just a general sense of malaise. I mean, I'd really like to know what is going particularly well, apart from the passport office, which is very good. It's just a general sense of decline and a failure to uphold standards. And also vision.
And to put up with it as well, because people just kind of go, well, you know, doesn't really work.
It is a sign of quite how placid we are, actually, that we put up with an awful lot that I think people would not actually have expected us to put up with. You know, before COVID, and when people were talking about the lockdown regulations that we're going to be bringing in, and people were saying people will never put up with that, but they absolutely did, and they put up with an awful lot that they shouldn't have done, and I think that's still being reflected now. You know, it's being reflected in the fact that the Labour government is lying through its teeth to people, is driving us over a cliff, and people are just going, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah, what are you going to do? What did you expect? Let's get a voice note from Dale, who's got some festive cheer.
We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a crappy 5 years. Bad tidings we'll bring from summer through spring. We wish you a Merry Christmas, we'll lie through the years.
Very true. Dale, well played. Very well done indeed. Morning, Mike, says Eric. The BBC will still not play the Starmer song. No, they won't, but we'll play it. We'll play it coming up throughout the course of the show. Don't worry. Freezing this Christmas. Nobody hates Keir Starmer more than the rest of the country. The man surely cannot last 5 years.